If you have we're doing, it's not the kind of sermon I typically do, but it's the fourth sermon in a row where I'm kind of bouncing around different passages. But if you would like to open up your Bibles to John chapter 10, that'd be a fine place to sit. We'll get there eventually. But otherwise, just enjoy the ride. How about that? The Westminster Catechism is a series of questions and answers that some theologians and pastors put together over about 4 years of gathering together and discussing the foundations of the faith. And it's a bunch of Presbyterian pastors back in, it was between 1643 to 1647. They would gather for these times of space, and they would argue, and they would talk, and they would dive into the scriptures. They came out with a Westminster Confession of Faith, which is like a book. It's got chapters in it. And they also came up with a larger and shorter catechism. And a catechism is a series of questions and answers that help us pass on the faith to other people, particularly kids, who you can do it in simple ways. And as they have finished it after 4 years of deliberation, they put it all together, and they come out and they give us the first question of the catechism, which is, what is the chief end of man? Answer, they say, man's chief end is to glorify God and love Him forever. Actually, I said that wrong. Did anybody know? Did anybody grow up in a tradition with this catechism? No. They actually said to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. Now, I find that interesting. I find that fascinating. That's the first thing out of the gate they come with. To glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. And every time I've heard that in my entire adult life, every time I've ever heard that, I get to that point and I think, wow, what a strange left turn that was. If you were to say, all right, Gary, here's the question: what is the chief end of man? What is the thing that's going to make us all know that a man's living into what God has created him to be? What's the answer? I would probably get maybe something kind of close to the first thing, to glorify God, right? But then I'm always caught off guard that these pastors from 1600s put this together, and they said, but also we want you to enjoy Him. That God's hope for you and God's hope for me, that as we live our lives, is not only that we will glorify Him, but we will also enjoy Him. This is why I'm so grateful that there are these generations of pastors and Christians and people who've followed God, who've gone before us, and their stories kind of make it down to us. Their work kind of makes it down to us. And now that someone says that out loud to me, I go, yeah, that's kind of an interesting idea. Now that someone's told me, I can chew on that idea. What does it mean to enjoy God? Because I think very often when it comes to Christians in America, we have a tendency to stop short on this. We have a tendency to kind of say, all right, no, our relationship with God stops at servitude. Our relationship with God stops at fearful awe of His presence. And both of those things are right, and both of those things are good. But that's where we stop, and these guys are going, no, you need to keep going. Keep diving into the relationship of God. Keep fighting for more. Keep finding more. And what you'll find is that we don't stop there, and we keep going into enjoyment, where we can enjoy God. And what I love about this question and answer is that it drives home a theme, a reminder that we have been bringing up over and over again this entire year, which is that as we live this life with God, as we follow what He calls us to, my prayer is that you will find what I have found, that God is not a tyrant, He's a friend. God's not a tyrant, He's a friend. Our theme for 2024 is spiritual friendships. And we're taking it off of the greatest commandments out of Matthew chapter 22. Teacher, some man walks up to Jesus and says, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And that is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the prophets, all the law hangs on these two commands. The law and the prophets, those are the curtains, but these two commands are the curtain rod. The law and the prophets, they're the suit. This is the hanger right here. This is what it's all. If we can get these two commands right, the rest will follow suit. Perhaps we need some education. Perhaps we need to learn what those different things God wants us to do are. But the desire to do the rest of it will follow suit if we can figure out these two. And the way we have phrased it for us is to say this. We want to, as a church, grow in friendship with God and grow in friendship with each other. That's what we're hoping for. And the reason I've said it this way is because perhaps I'm too cute for my own good, and I think I'm more profound than I really am. That's always a possibility. But my hope was that when I put it this way was that it would be different enough that it would kind of shake us out of our ruts of familiarity. The greatest commandments will never be tired and old, right? They're never going to be the things like, oh, that's like third grade stuff, I'm done with that. No, it will never be tired and old. But when we hear something often enough, what we do is we think, oh yeah, I've heard that forever. I've heard that my whole life. I've heard that since I was a child. What we tend to think when we get in that moment is that because we are familiar with it, that means we have plumbed the depths of whatever it is we're talking about. And we haven't. You can't plumb the depths of the two greatest commands. If the entire law and all the prophets hang on these two commands, you can't plumb the depths of them. And so the hope is that as we change it a little bit, it'll get our spiritual and creative juices flowing, and we can actually ask questions. Okay, how would I grow in relationship? No, how would I grow in friendship with God? If I had to figure it out, how would I do it? How would I grow in friendship with people in my life, in my church, in my neighborhood? How would I do that? And as we take this different approach, we apply it to ourselves, we ask ourselves, okay, how do we go about doing this as a church? And so the reason for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be doing a series called Spiritual Friendships Revisited. The first 2 weeks of the year were called Spiritual Friendships, and we're doing it again to yes, cover it over, but also to give us a chance to kind of stop and say, all right, we're pretty much at the halfway point. How are we doing? How have we gone with this attempt to try to grow in friendship with God and friendship with each other? Because as Andy Stanley says, if it's worth doing, it's worth evaluating. Even though no one really follows up on the second part. And so here it is. How is it? How are we doing? How are we enjoying God? Now, the idea of enjoying God has really taken a beating in our society, and I think that this is actually one of the great accomplishments of the new atheists that about 20 years ago had a 10, 15-year run where they could just kind of run wild, and they were super deeply influential in our culture. But their great achievement and the great damage they caused the church was not that they turned everybody into atheists, because they obviously have not done that. It has never been the case, not even close to the case, that most people on earth are atheists. That's not the case. That's not what they've accomplished. And I read recently that in the scientific community of scientists and whatever, there's a higher percentage of God believers, higher power believers, whatever, religious people in the scientific world than there has been in like 100 years. Okay, so like their victory was not in turning everybody into a bunch of atheists. Their victory was how they tainted your and my view of God. In our attempts to rebut them or debate them, they would come out and they would say, oh, you believe in a flying spaghetti monster in the sky who just sits back and watches tsunamis come and destroy coastlines filled with men, women, and children. And by the way, it's silly to believe in him anyways. There's no evidence of this, that, and the other. And we would come back and we go, no, there is a flying spaghetti monster, and that's a good thing. And you're going, wait, time out, what? And I don't, please hear me when I say this, none of our apologists were ever quite that dumb. A lot of our Christian apologists have sent those guys, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and Daniel Dennett. They sent those guys packing a lot of really embarrassing public ways sometimes. But, debate's kind of like a fight, and so they've also sent a lot of our guys packing. But they were never quite that dumb. What happened was that we kind of adopted that. Where we kind of got ourselves pushed into a corner where we felt like, oh, yeah, I mean, maybe there are kind of a lot of things that are unsavory about the Bible, and okay, maybe there's a lot of things I don't particularly have to like about God, but you just kind of have to come to terms with it, and you just kind of, and what they've done to us is they kind of put us in a position where, best case scenario, if you are going to believe in God, you're going to have to do it with your head hung low. As if you're like admitting defeat in some way. And you can see this. How we oftentimes we think it's like, okay, well, yeah, but what it means to be a Christian is you got to just kind of come to terms with God, and there's some things that I don't have to agree with, but I can, it's okay because there's these other parts. Well, Jesus comes in the New Testament, and there's these other things, and we kind of have this view of God that's tainted. And when these theologians and pastors got together in the 1600s, they said, what's the chief end of man? They did not say, come to terms with God. They said to glorify Him and to enjoy Him forever. And unfortunately, we have allowed ourselves to accept a premise of God that is not a Christian premise, but one that was put upon us by some atheists who wanted to destroy our faith. And Jesus is going, I didn't come here. I didn't leave my throne in heaven. I didn't die on a cross just so you can all come to terms with me, but that I can be with you, that we could have a relationship, that we could be, dare I say it, friends. Here are some verses that I've cherry-picked. I did the dreaded cherry picking, Dallas. You're happy? Psalm 16 verse 11 says this is from King David. It says, you make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. So David had this mindset of God. They said, when I come in towards you, I don't find drudgery. I don't find hardship. I don't find these things. Life always involves those things, but that's not what I'm ascribing to God. When I walk into and towards God, what I'm finding is joy and pleasure. I'm walking into His life, that He has laid out my life for me. He's kind of framed things out. He has given me this framework inside which we can live, which is life with God. And David goes, when I get inside of that, I don't feel Him binding me. I don't feel Him taking things away from me. I feel Him bringing joy into my life. I feel Him bringing pleasure into my life. And David says, like children who, though they will never say it out loud, are thirsting and longing for some sort of framework inside which they can live. Inside, that can be said, hey, if you're inside this framework, the playing can happen, the fun can run wild, but you got to stay inside of this framework. David says we get the very same thing from God. God tells us what we should be aiming for. And this is the idea in this is a Western thing we have to deal with. In our world today, the idea that anyone else should frame your path for your life at all is anathema. It is the only true sin in our society. Everything in our society is up for grabs. Everything is. You're not allowed to say there's just truth out there. There's your truth. You're not allowed to define something for somebody else. Everyone has to define it for themselves. Everything is up for grabs. There's nothing made known. There's no path for life anywhere for anybody. You got to go find it for yourself. And it is wreaking havoc on our society. It is making it to where kids when we're not even allowed to define what a boy or a girl is for a child, they have to figure it out for themselves. We're not even allowed to point out to people, well, here's what we're expecting from men, and here's what we're expecting for women. People have to figure it out for themselves. And it creates something almost impossible to live out because no one knows what they should be aiming for. I'm getting into it because I'm getting a cough. Uh-oh. But here's something very interesting. There's two religions that seem to have almost nothing to offer the Western secular world. And yet they get a lot of converts. Islam and Mormonism. And when people kind of look into it, they kind of go, I don't even, why are they choosing these things? The reports tend to come back, well, at least in these places, they're willing to say something is right and something is wrong. We live in a society that is so afraid to say anything is right and anything is wrong that people will go anywhere searching for it. They'll find personalities on the internet. They'll find religious beliefs that maybe are not all that defensible, or they'll find anything they can find to just search for something that will help them figure out the path of their life. And David goes, that's what we have in God. And once we find it, we don't find drudgery or hatred or God trying to squeeze us, but we find joy and pleasure. David also said this, is perhaps one of the most famous psalms out there. It says, one thing I would ask from the Lord, and only this do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord, to seek him in his temple. To David, that was something worth spending an entire life chasing. A God who would say, here's the path I want you to walk down. Here's the road I've laid out for you. And what David found as he approached that God was that God who lays out a path for us is not a tyrant, but he's a friend. The angel Gabriel comes to Mary and says, you're going to give birth to the Messiah. And he says this, do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all people. That what Jesus' mission, what his goal was to bring to the world was not what we tend to think about it, but was going to bring joy and pleasure and beauty to all people. We find ourselves in a spot where we don't know what to do with God in our society. But God's sitting there going, come to me. Come to me. In me you will have friendship. In me you'll have joy. Because what Jesus offers is life inside of Jesus. Like our life will exist inside of him. John 10 is one of the great passages of the Bible at all. It's the Good Shepherd passage. It's the passage that tells us that Jesus is the Good Shepherd. He's not like a hired hand, right? A shepherd lays down his life for the flock, right? He goes out and he fights against the bears and the wolves and the lions that come attacking the herd, right? That's what he says. He says the hired hands, they run for cover because they're not, it's like, I'm not going to die for these sheep that don't even belong to me. He goes, but when the sheep belong to the shepherd, he will fight for them, right? This is one of those great moments. And in John 10 verse 9, he says this. He says, I am the gate. It's one of those great I am statements in the Bible. It says, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. So Jesus says elsewhere, he says, I am the way, the truth, and life, and no one gets to the Father but through me. And this is that moment right here, one of those ways where he's saying, I'm the doorway. I'm the way into this life. And he says, they will come in and they will go out and they will find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy, and I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. See, that's one of those. That last part right there is the big one that we always. It's one of the back. Some of our Bibles say abundant life. I have come that you can have a life and life abundantly, life to the full. I want you to live a true human life. I don't want you to spend your life resisting God forever and saying, I'm going to build my own life however I want to do it, and then go falling off a cliff, crashing your car, whatever you're going to do, making a wreck of your life. I want you to come into Jesus and find life and life to the full. But But there's this little line in there that I just find fascinating, which says, when people come into life with me, what will happen is they will come in and they will go out and they'll have pasture. He says, this relationship that you have with me, Jesus Christ, has this coming and going aspect to it. It's kind of like this umbrella that your whole life can exist under. That you'll go out about your life and you'll come back in. Whatever it looks like, Christ will be there, and He'll be in the middle of it. He'll be in it. He'll be over it. He'll be around it. It's like being a parent. If you're a parent, you finally get the date night set up on the calendar. You get a babysitter. You get the kids out of the room for like a minute. And you sit down over dinner and you talk about the kids. And you tell stories about what the kids did. Just like you would have if they were in the room. You're just talking about the kids. And it's a date with your wife. And you're at a nice dinner. And you're doing the whole thing. But the fact that you are a parent never disappears. The kids existing is just a constant part of your life. It will always be there. When you go to work, you're a dad or you're a mom. And when you come home, you're a dad or your mom. And when you go to play somewhere, you're a dad. And so when you think about this, you realize, oh, I have to figure out how to go to work as a dad. This isn't just here for me to go buy a boat for me. No, I have to go. I'm making a home for my kids. I'm providing for my family. I have to go to work as a mom. I can't just go do things all willy-nilly. It's the fact that you have kids is just a constant, ever-present reality in your life until one day they turn 18, you kick them out, and you go, oh, thank the Lord. It's just a constant thing. As you come out, as you go, as you come in, there's just kids. The same thing is with your life with Jesus. It is pervasive in the most positive way of using that word. I think that word has a negative connotation, but it's just everywhere. It's in everything. And as you go to work as a Christian. And as you come back home as a Christian. As you interact with your friends, you interact with your friends as a Christian. And you do, I'm not going to say anything about, you do everything. It's just, He's just everywhere. And Jesus says, as we do, we'll find pasture. Because we have a good friend in Jesus. He's the good shepherd. And this reality is so true that the Apostle Paul could say this. So, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it to the glory of God. We don't get to just compartmentalize things. Go, well, this is when I'm going to act like a Christian here, and this is when I'm going to do whatever I want to do over here. He goes, no, wherever you go, as you come in and go out, as you eat, you drink, whatever you do, the glory of God, the enjoyment of God is and should be there. The Last Battle is one of the Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis books, the famous children's stories that he wrote. And in The Last Battle, the kids come across this shed, this stable, and it's kind of dumpy and normal looking on the outside. And then they get in through the door and they realize inside this normal, dumpy stable is just this wonderful land. Amazing landscape, this world they discovered. And as they're describing it to somebody, one of the kids says, it's just bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And when our world looks at Christianity, all it can think of is binding. All it can think of is putting pressure on people. All it can think of is rules and things you can't do and that. And when South Park made fun of the Jonas Brothers for wearing a purity ring, I don't know if you remember this, I was in college when it happened. When they made those episodes to make fun of them, they stated the world's view of Christianity perfectly. I got a ring on my finger to remind me what I cannot do. That's as deep as our world can get when it comes to Jesus Christ. And all we can say is, and all I can say is, the Christian life, that framework that God has for us to live inside of, is just bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. There's just more to it than you have been taught to believe. There's more to submitting your life under Jesus Christ than there is to any amount of freedom you can find in the world you're offered out there. There's just more to it. It's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. The world won't understand it. But as you and I walk forward in our faith, say, God, I'm going to submit here. I'm going to follow you here. I'm going to keep moving forward in my faith, in my relationship with you. My prayer is that you and I will look up one day and we'll realize, wow, what a big, wonderful world I have found under Christ Jesus. What an amazing landscape I have found that is truly bigger on the inside than it is the outside. This is what Jesus has come to offer us. And so the question is, how's your friendship? How have you been approaching God this year? How have you been allowing yourself to let God come into your life and say, hey, here's something I want you to do, and just follow through with it, and I want you to find enjoyment on the other side. I want you to trust me. Have you allowed God to push you in areas or directions or places you were not willing to go before? Hey, Bradley, come on up. We're closing down. Famous last words on a preacher. We're about to be here for 35 more minutes, guys. But how's the friendship going? How have you grown in your relationship with Christ? Have you grown to find Him enjoyable this year in a way that you've not previously? Have you come to see any truth in the claim that God's not a tyrant, but He's a friend? Have you been able to find any truth in that? I can tell you what I've seen in our church. I can't see people's hearts, but I can see people. I've seen people gathering in groups, taking... Yeah, I don't know if you have sound over there or not. Bradley's about to play just for himself over there. I've seen people gathering and joining in Bible studies, getting together one-on-one, talking through books of the Bible. Sheila and Megan have both started women's studies this year. The people have come in and tried to hear what the Bible has to teach from some, and what this other book has to teach. This book on being a woman and being a woman as a Christian to God. I've seen these things happen. More studies and more groups are getting together that are available to you. I've seen Jesse get baptized this year and just say, I'm stepping in. And he's, within weeks, he's leading our men's Bible study. And he and his wife teach a week every month in our kids' ministry. I mean, I've seen people, Charles just reaching out to younger men in our church, just saying, if the doors are open, I'll be there, and just spending time with people in our church, just saying, hey, I'll be there. I'll sit around a fire with you guys. I'll come hang out. I've sat in Bible studies where people have just said, hey, look, I don't know if I can even accept what I've just read here. I go, great, let's talk about it. Let's explore God. Let's do that. I've seen a lot of this happening. And these avenues are open to you. I've seen people getting into the Word in ways they've never done before. I know some people who just started at page 1 and said, I don't know, it's the Bible, I'll just start reading. And they got stuck in the middle of Exodus. That's the way it works. But I can't evaluate everyone's walk with Christ. I can't evaluate how everyone's going. But I do know that God's doing some really cool things in the life of this church. And my hope is that you will take one step further in You'll go, okay, all right, God's asked me to do something I wasn't planning on doing. I didn't want to do it, but he's asking me now, what's one more step in you can do? By the way, I just printed these off. I got these from a student Bible my parents gave me when I was a kid. If you've never spent any time reading the Bible, you don't even know where to start, don't even know what to do, out on the table where the bulletins are is this Introduction to the Bible reading plan. It's 2 weeks on the life and teachings of Jesus, 2 weeks on the life and teachings of Paul, and 2 weeks in the Old Testament. Just some of the big stories, big passages of Scripture, and it's kind of the highlights. And if you've never had any time reading the Bible, that'd be a great starting point. Take your time through it, mark it off as you go, and you can just see what's in there. These are a way. It's kind of a guided way to kind of get in there. It's not a systematic way, but it's a way for you to say, all right, I'm going to start this habit in my life. Okay, really, God's offering me friendship. God's really offering enjoyment from Him. Let me step into it. Let me see if I can. Let me see what He's offering. But at some point, the sermon ends. At some point, the worship service is over. At some point, we go home, we look at ourselves in the mirror one last time before we go to bed. And at some point, every one of us has to make whatever decision we're going to make about God for ourselves. And we know what decision Jesus would make because He's already done it. He did leave His throne. He did die on a cross. He did raise from the dead, and He did say, go into all the world and tell them about my love for them. He's already done that. We know His decision. The one you and I have to make is, what will we do with this man, Jesus Christ? What will we do with His love? What will we do with His call? What will we do with His relationship? And we all have to make that decision on our own. My prayer is that you will take one step further in. If that's starting praying more often, do it. If that's starting to read your Bible more often, do it. If that's starting to show up at things at church more often, do it. If that's, what's your one step further in? And do it. Don't get cold feet forever. Don't be the kid at the top of the sky, the high dive forever. Let's do it. Let's see what this path is that God has laid out for us so we can find joy and pleasure in. What is it? Let's go find it. And here's the hard point. Here's the hard truth. With Jesus Christ, to not make a decision is to make a decision. He's just sitting there. He stands there. Behold, I stand at the door and I knock. And everyone who opens the door to me, I come in, I will be with him, and he will be with me. I'll be your God, you will be my people. That'll be an amazing day. But if we just sit there and we let him knock forever, that is to make a decision. What's our next step in? And can we at Foothills be a church filled with people who take that next step? Because that next step is not being offered by a tyrant. It's being beckoned by a friend who has life for you and life to the full.